Welcome back to Adaptive Humans. I'm your host, Jamie DeLu. Around here, we return to three anchors: how we navigate our emotions, how we adapt across differences, and how we steady ourselves when stress or triggers show up. Because that's what helps us stay human when life gets real. This is episode 5 of season 2. We open the season by talking about what it means to begin again, to recalibrate, to find your footing when the ground keeps shifting. We named the invisible load, the things we carry that don't show up on the calendar but shape every decision we make. We named decision debt. What happens when capacity is so consistently overtaxed that decisions stop being made and start accumulating? Then we had Deja Heck join us, and we talked about what it looks like when the body itself becomes the constraint, when the interruption isn't a reorg or a difficult quarter. It's when your body decides for you. Today, I want to talk about what can come before that moment, the long stretch before something breaks, the years of override, the sophisticated, practiced, often invisible skill of performing fine. Today, we're naming it functional masking, performing competent while running a threat detection, being on high alert, and what happens when the mask becomes so well fitted you've stopped noticing it's on. Beyond the bio, this is where we get underneath the surface, not the credentials, the patterns. For a significant stretch of my career, I was committed to being a high performer. Every organization I was a part of valued it and expected it. Having been a dancer and a performer for most of my life, striving for precise delivery and mastery of my craft gave me deep muscle memory to work hard and have extremely high expectations. I may have shifted from precision of my moves to deep expertise, but ultimately, it was about being trusted to solve complex challenges and deliver results with speed and precision. I showed up prepared, I moved things forward, and I held the room. What I didn't have language for then is that what I was calling high performance actually was something else. It was a highly refined coping system. And underneath all of it, my nervous system was running threat detection the entire time. I wasn't burnt out yet. I was functional. Over-functioning, really. This is where you start to override the cues to pause to where you should recalibrate or set boundaries. The problem is that it was working in a way that was costing me things I couldn't measure, did not fully see or understand because I could not feel the gap. I didn't slow down voluntarily. Something made the slowing down unavoidable. And when I finally had enough stillness to actually listen to what my nervous system had been trying to tell me, I realized it had been saying the same thing for a very long time. I just hadn't had the quiet to hear it. Or honestly, I think some part of me had been afraid of what would happen if I stopped. I didn't know what it meant to slow down or stop. That's what I want to talk about today. Not the moment it breaks, that long stretch before when the mask is so well fitted you've stopped noticing it's on. What is functional masking? When I think about a way to describe this, what comes to mind is the concept of covering. Kenji Yoshino, a legal scholar out of NYU, coined the term covering nearly 20 years ago. And the research he built with Deloitte is worth noticing and knowing. 3/4 of people in their study reported covering some aspect of themselves at work. Even half of straight white men reported it too, which tells us this is not just an identity-specific story, even though the weight of it is absolutely not equal across all groups. Covering is the practice of downplaying an aspect of yourself to fit the dominant expectation of a space, not hiding who you are entirely. managing how much of yourself you let show. So maybe you're a mother who doesn't mention her children at work, or a leader that doesn't name when they're struggling, or a professional who has learned over a long career exactly how much of their real internal state is acceptable to show up at work. Functional masking shows up as a leadership specific expression of covering, but it's really a workplace specific expression because it often starts long before you become a leader. You consistently started taking on more, even the most complex work or the most challenging people dynamics, because being capable had become automatic. And it's not lying. It's the practiced, often unconscious skill of performing regulated when you aren't, of presenting composure as the primary output, regardless of what's actually running underneath the surface. The mask works. That's the whole problem. It gets you promoted. It gets you trusted. It gets you in the rooms. And then it keeps running long after you've forgotten it's on. The research on what's sometimes called surface acting is consistent. It's performing in a regulated external state while your internal state stays unchanged. This depletes the same cognitive and self-regulatory resources that decision-making, trust, and nuanced leadership require. You cannot sustainably perform regulated and be regulated at the same time. Not over years, not without a cost. And functional masking doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It gets selected for in hiring, rewarded in performance reviews, modeled by every leader who has ever treated composure as the primary leadership competency. The generation of leaders now in their mid-40s to late 50s, even early 60s, came up in a very specific era. The explicit message was, leave it at the door. Be professional. Composure is competence. And then sometime in the last decade or so, the language flipped. Bring your whole self to work. Psychological safety, authenticity, all important characteristics, but the reward structure didn't flip with it. So this generation of people learned to cover under one set of rules, now operates in an organization that says the opposite without ever being given permission or practice in how to actually take the mask off. That's not a personal failure. It's a timing problem, and it's a design problem. We don't build organizations that help leaders detect this early enough. We build organizations that reward the absence of visible struggle. So the leader who is most practiced at covering gets the most positive signals from the system right up until the moment they don't. There's no dashboard for this. The organization finds out when something breaks, and then we call it a surprise. Let's talk a little bit about 3 things that functional masking actually costs. The first, decision quality. When the threat detection is running underneath composure, the brain is allocating resources to the performance that would otherwise go to nuanced thinking. The decisions that feel fine in the moment often carry the cost downstream, not because the leader stopped caring, because the tank was running a second program the whole time while trying to perform on the surface. The second is trust. Teams read the gap between what they're being told and what they're reading in the room, even when they can't name it. A leader who is performing composed while running something else underneath signals misalignment that erodes psychological safety quietly without any single incident you can really point to. Or they're running it like that until it erupts. The mask becomes the norm, and then you have a room full of people performing fine at each other. The ability to accurately assess yourself, it's not there. This is the one that matters most and gets named the least. If you've been performing regulated for long enough, you lose access to accurate self-assessment. You can no longer tell the difference between being fine and performing fine. And that's not a weakness, it's physiological. And it matters enormously when the roles change and the stakes go up. The third concept is the detection problem. Here's what makes functional masking different from ordinary stress. When the threat detection runs chronically at a low level, the nervous system does something adaptive. It recalibrates. What used to register as a warning signal gets reclassified as baseline. You stop feeling the alarm signals because the alarm has become wallpaper. And quiet isn't the same as off. Most leaders who are functionally masking at a high level don't get a gradual warning. They get a cliff. And that cliff rarely looks like a dramatic break. For high-functioning, highly practiced leaders, it tends to look like one of these. A health event. The body routes around the coping system when it has no other option. A relationship rupture. The people closest absorb what the professional container couldn't hold. A performance miss that feels disproportionately catastrophic because it's not just a miss, it's a crack in the identity built on never missing. Or, and this one is underrated, a moment of unexpected stillness. Maybe it's a vacation, a weekend without meetings, where the absence of stimulus lets the actual signal through for the first time in years. That last one doesn't feel like breaking. It feels like finally sitting down and not being able to get back up. Unless you took the time to slow down and figure out what was happening, you didn't know the threat signals until something sent you over the edge. The nervous system had been speaking. You just hadn't had the quiet to hear it. Or maybe you were too afraid that what you'd find if you stopped. I want to say something directly to leaders and professionals in their late 40s and 50s who are listening to this episode. Because I think this moment deserves to be named out loud. Many of us in this season of life, for the first time, are actually doing the work, learning to understand the alarm, developing coping mechanisms that aren't just refined survival strategies, building the kind of self-awareness that makes us genuinely better leaders and colleagues, not just more productive ones. And this is also the season when many of us are navigating layoffs, finding it harder to land the next role, sitting with the particular disorientation of being more capable than we've ever been and less visible than we've ever felt. Gen X is a small generation. We've always had to fight for visibility. Between the boomers ahead of us and the millennials behind us, and now Gen Z is also in the workforce. And right now, some of the most experienced, most self-aware, most ready leaders and professionals I know are wondering if there's still a seat at the table for them. A seat they've earned, with the depth to lead across generations and the complexity of this moment. The cruel irony is this: the skills that this generation is finally developing, emotional regulation, the ability to hold complexity, the capacity to name what's actually happening in a room, are the precise skills that organizations claim they want from senior leaders. But hiring structures don't reward these skills. They reward optics, proximity to emerging technology, and cost efficiency. So this generation cracked the code, and the game changed. That's not a personal failure. That's a system eating its most experienced people at the moment they become the most useful. And I don't have a clean answer to that. What I do have is this: the work you're doing to finally understand your own nervous system, to close the gap between performing fine and actually being fine, that work is not contingent on whether a hiring manager sees value in it right now. It is the work, and it will matter, even if the timing is painful. Brave enough moment. The brave enough moment isn't a dramatic leap. It's the step you take before you can see the whole horizon. The brave enough moment here is not removing the mask all at once. That's not realistic, and that's not what I'm asking anyone to do. The brave enough moment is starting to notice the gap. Here's what I know from the inside. The hardest part isn't the insight. It's the system you built to survive doesn't know it's safe to change. The mask is load bearing. It got you here. Some part of you is still protecting it. And that's okay. You don't have to judge that. And that's not a mindset problem. Again, it's physiological and it's workable. What brave enough looks like in practice is naming it to somebody. Doesn't have to be publicly, not dramatically, to one person who can hold it. I've been performing fine for a long time, and I'm not sure I remember what not performing fine feels like. That sentence is the beginning of something. This is a great time to utilize a coach, or if you have access to employee assistance programs or EAP through your job, or access to therapy if you have coverage. Letting stillness be information. The next time you have a quiet moment and something surfaces that surprises you, don't rush to overwrite it. Don't just schedule something to keep you busy. Let it be data. Your nervous system has been trying to tell you something. You just need enough stillness to hear it. And this is something I also learned myself. If getting still feels new to you, sometimes the best thing you can do is find a way to release that energy. Maybe it's a workout or a walk or out in nature or some kind of way that you can move into stillness. Sometimes that helps. Separating the role from the performance of the role. You are not your composure. The value you bring is not contingent on how regulated you appear. That distinction, practiced deliberately, is how you start to take the mask off without losing the room. And I understand you may want to do that outside of the workplace and practice it there first, but you have to practice doing it. And for those of you leading others, the brave enough moment is modeling imperfect presence, not oversharing, not making your team responsible for your processing, but letting them see that you are a person operating inside real conditions, not a performance of a role that you hold in leadership. That's what builds trust, not the composure itself, the signal that composure is real. The just be reset. This is where we slow down enough to actually feel what we've been carrying. Before we close, let's take a pause. Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, feel both feet on the ground if you're able. Inhale for 4 and exhale for 8. Without trying to fix anything, sit with this question. When did you last feel the difference between performing fine and actually being fine? If your answer is not recently, that gap is worth being curious about. Not as a problem to solve in this moment, just as information. Go ahead and take one more breath in for 4 and out for 8. I want to share a short functional masking inventory. 3 questions worth sitting with this week. Question 1. Where in your professional work and/or leadership are you performing regulated when you're not? Not looking for a confession here, more of a noticing without judgment. Just noticed where that gap seems the widest for you. Question 2. When did performing fine, no matter how you feel, become a consistent strategy? Note the first time you felt like you were covering something. What was happening then? What did that environment reward? And question 3. What would you do differently if no one were watching? Think of this in terms of one specific meeting or one specific conversation or one decision you're carrying right now. What would the unmasked version choose? And it's okay if you don't have an answer to that yet. That's your functional masking inventory. You don't have to solve it all today. We are taking this step just to consider it. So, what we named today, functional masking, is real. It is the practiced, often unconscious performance of regulated performance and leadership while something else entirely runs underneath. It is not a character flaw. It is a learned response to environments that reward composure and penalize visible struggle. And it compounds quietly until the gap between performing fine and actually being fine becomes too wide to close without help. The generation of leaders doing this reckoning right now, often for the first time, in the middle of a market that doesn't always see them, is doing some of the most important leadership work there is. Even when it's not visible, even when it's not rewarded yet. The work of understanding your own nervous system is never the wrong investment. If functional masking is already expensive, I want you to sit for a moment with what it means for leaders who have been covering not just in the role, but in their entire lives, whose nervous systems learned threat detection not in the C-suite, but in childhood, in culture, in every room where they were the only ones that looked like them. That is a different weight, and that is a different conversation, which is exactly why I hope you'll join me on April 21st for a conversation with my guest, Ritu Basin. We're talking about caregiving culture and the load no one sees. Around here, we return to 3 anchors: how we navigate our emotions, how we adapt across differences, and how we steady ourselves when stress shows up. Because that's what helps us stay human when life gets real. Thank you for being here. You don't have to take the whole mask off today. It is also okay if you cannot see the mask. Maybe start to notice and allow it to be okay if you do see it. Adaptability starts with presence. Take a deep breath, reset, and keep practicing connection with yourself first and with others that help you take good care of yourself. As always, remember, I am brave, I am enough, I am brave enough, and so are you. This is Adaptive Humans. Real talk, intentional growth.